Alberta has just dropped a political bombshell, and the shockwaves are shaking the foundations of the entire country. Premier Danielle Smith's government has introduced the Alberta Sovereignty Act, a direct challenge to federal authority and a dramatic escalation in the long-standing tensions between Alberta and Ottawa. For some, it's a bold stand for provincial rights. For others, it's the first real step toward breaking up Canada. What exactly is in this controversial piece of legislation that has Ottawa in crisis mode? How did decades of Western alienation build up to this explosive moment? And could Alberta actually be laying the groundwork for separation? Let's unpack the roots of this historic conflict and what it could mean for the future of the Canadian Federation. You understand? Rise of separatist sentiment in Alberta. Alberta's dream of breaking away from Canada isn't something new. It's been bubbling under the surface for decades, with many Albertans feeling like they're getting a raw deal from the rest of the country. Back in the 1980s, Alberta first saw real separatist feelings take root. Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau's National Energy Program made many Albertans furious because they felt Ottawa was grabbing their oil wealth. This led to bumper stickers with slogans like, "Let the Eastern Bastards freeze in the dark," showing up across the province. The idea of Alberta going its own way quieted down for a while, but never completely disappeared. In recent years, it's come roaring back stronger than ever. A 2019 poll showed something that shocked many Canadians. About 33% of Albertans supported the idea of separation. That's 1 in 3 people thinking Alberta might be better off on its own. Why are so many Albertans feeling this way? A big reason is money. Alberta sends billions more dollars to Ottawa than it gets back in services and support. In fact, between 2007 and 2018, Albertans contributed nearly $240 billion more to federal coffers than they received in return. Many people in the province feel like they're being treated like Canada's piggy bank. Oil and gas is another huge issue. When the federal government makes rules that hurt Alberta's main industry, people get angry. The carbon tax and pipeline delays have made many Albertans feel like Ottawa doesn't care about their jobs or economy. In 2019, a group called Wexit Alberta, combining Western and Exit, gained thousands of followers almost overnight. They later joined with similar groups to form the Maverick Party, pushing for either more independence or complete separation. A 2021 survey found that separatist feelings weren't going away. About 25% of Albertans still supported the idea. Even more telling, almost 63% said they understood why some people wanted to separate even if they didn't agree. Premier Danielle Smith has tapped into these feelings with her Alberta Sovereignty Act, which aims to give the province more power to ignore federal laws it doesn't like. While Smith herself doesn't openly call for separation, her policies appeal to those who feel Alberta needs to stand up to Ottawa. The Fair Deal panel, created by former Premier Jason Kenney, recommended several steps toward more independence, including Alberta collecting its own taxes, creating a provincial police force instead of using the RCMP, and pulling out of the Canada Pension Plan to create an Alberta-only retirement system. Rural areas tend to support separation more strongly than cities like Calgary and Edmonton. A regional breakdown shows support as high as 45% in some rural parts of the province. Young people are surprisingly supportive of separation too. Among Albertans aged 18 to 34, support for independence has reached 37% in some polls, higher than the provincial average. If Alberta ever did separate, it would be North America's 4th largest oil producer, behind only the US, Mexico, and the remaining parts of Canada. This economic power is why many separatists believe an independent Alberta could thrive on its own, and it's not just talk anymore. Political maneuvers and referendum plans. Alberta's government has started taking real steps toward possibly leaving Canada. Premier Danielle Smith and her United Conservative Party aren't just talking about independence anymore. They're actually doing something about it. Last week, Premier Smith announced plans for a referendum that would ask Albertans a simple question: should Alberta remain part of Canada? This is a huge deal because it moves the idea of separation from just talk to actual government action. To make this referendum happen, Smith's government first had to introduce a special bill in Alberta's legislature. This bill, called the Alberta Sovereignty Act, lays out all the rules for how the vote will work. The government needed enough members to vote yes on this bill for it to become law. Once the bill passed, the government had to set up a referendum commission. This group of people will make sure the vote is fair and organized properly. They'll decide things like where voting stations will be located, who can work at these stations, and how votes will be counted. The referendum also needs a clear question that people can understand. Smith's team spent weeks working with lawyers to make make sure the wording wasn't confusing, they settled on the straightforward question about staying in Canada. For the vote to happen, the government had to set aside money to pay for everything, from printing ballots to hiring workers at voting stations. The Alberta cabinet approved about $20 million to cover all these costs. Under Canadian law, provinces can hold referendums on almost any issue, but the results don't automatically change anything. Even if Albertans voted to leave, the Canadian government would need to agree to negotiate separation terms. This is because Canada's constitution doesn't have clear rules for a province leaving. Smith has said that if Albertans vote to separate, she would immediately start talks with the federal government in Ottawa. Her plan includes forming a special negotiating team made up of legal experts, economists, and former politicians who understand how the Canadian government works. The United Conservative Party has also created a committee to plan what an independent Alberta might look like. They're working on ideas for a new Alberta currency, border control systems, and even how to divide up national assets like military equipment. Not everyone in Alberta supports these moves. Opposition parties have called the referendum a waste of money and a dangerous distraction from real problems like healthcare and education. They argue that Smith is using separation threats mainly to pressure the federal government for better treatment. Some legal experts have pointed out that even starting this process could hurt Alberta's economy. They worry that businesses might not want to invest in a place that could leave Canada. The referendum is scheduled for next spring, giving both sides plenty of time to make their case to voters. Smith's government has already started an information campaign explaining why they believe Alberta would be better off on its own, while those who want to stay in Canada are organizing their own efforts to convince people to vote against separation, and they're not wrong to worry. Economic implications of Alberta's potential separation. Alberta's possible split from Canada would create huge money problems for both sides. Let's look at what might happen if Alberta actually decided to leave. Alberta has tons of oil and natural gas. In fact, it has the third largest oil reserves in the world after Saudi Arabia and Venezuela. This makes Alberta super important to Canada's economy. Right now, Alberta produces about 80% of Canada's oil and sends a lot of money to the federal government through taxes. If Alberta left, Canada would lose billions of dollars every year. The country would have to import more oil from other places, which would cost more money. Gas prices would probably go up across Canada, and many Canadians might lose their jobs, especially those working in businesses connected to Alberta's energy sector. For Alberta, leaving might seem good at first. They wouldn't have to send so much money to Ottawa anymore. Alberta sends about $20 billion more to the federal government each year than it gets back in services and benefits. That's a lot of money that could stay in Alberta if it became its own country. But becoming a new country isn't easy or cheap. Alberta would need to create its own military, passport system, trade deals, and maybe even its own currency. These things cost a lot of money and take time to set up. One big problem would be getting oil to markets. Right now, Alberta uses pipelines that go through the rest of Canada to ship oil. If Alberta left, Canada might charge fees for using these pipelines or make new rules that hurt Alberta's oil business. Trade would be another headache. Alberta would have to make new agreements with the United States, Canada, and other countries. This could take years, and during that time, businesses might suffer. The banking system would face challenges too. Would Alberta keep using Canadian dollars? Would they make their own money? Either way, there would be confusion and possibly economic problems during the change. Jobs could be affected as well. Many companies might leave Alberta if it's separated, especially those that do business across Canada. Government workers who currently work for Canada would need new jobs with the Alberta government, or they might move away. Alberta's neighbors would feel effects too. British Columbia, Saskatchewan, and the territories all have close ties with Alberta through roads, electricity systems, and business connections. These links would need to be reworked. There's also the question of debt. If Alberta left, would it have to take a portion of Canada's national debt? That could be hundreds of billions of dollars that Alberta would suddenly owe. Indigenous communities present another complex issue. Many First Nations have treaties with the Canadian government, not Alberta. These agreements about land rights and resources would need to be figured out. The bottom line is that separation would cause major economic shakeups. While Alberta might gain more control over its resources and tax money, both Alberta and Canada would face years of uncertainty and probably economic hardship during the transition. Neither side would escape without feeling significant financial pain, and the effects would ripple throughout North America's economy, and when the news hit, the reaction was immediate. Federal and provincial reactions. The news of Alberta's bold move spread like wildfire across Canada. In Ottawa, the Prime Minister called an emergency meeting with his cabinet. The federal government was caught off guard by Alberta's announcement about potentially leaving Canada. This is a serious challenge to our national unity, the Prime Minister stated during a press conference. He looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes after hours of emergency meetings. We need to listen to Alberta's concerns, but we also need to remind all Canadians that we are stronger together. The federal government quickly formed a special task force to address Alberta's complaints. They promised to review the equalization payment system that many Albertans felt was unfair. The finance minister announced they would look at ways to help Alberta's struggling oil industry, which had been hit hard by low global prices and pipeline delays. Meanwhile, reactions from other provinces varied widely. In Quebec, where separation talks had happened before, the premier was careful with his words. "We understand the frustration of feeling unheard by Ottawa," he said, "but breaking up the country creates more problems than it solves." Ontario's premier took a firmer stance against Alberta's move. "This is reckless and hurts all Canadians. We need to work out our differences through talking, not threats." She promised to be a bridge between Alberta and the federal government. British Columbia, Alberta's neighbor to the west, was especially worried. Their premier pointed out that both provinces' economies were closely tied together. If Alberta separates, both our provinces would face huge economic damage. Thousands of families have relatives living on both sides of our border, and in the Atlantic provinces, which receive some of the equalization payments that Alberta contributes to, there was concern about what this might mean for their budgets. "We need these programs to provide basic services," explained Newfoundland's premier. But we also understand Alberta's frustration with the system. With that, political experts weighed in on the crisis. Dr. Sarah Johnson, who studies Canadian politics at the University of Toronto, explained that this was the most serious unity challenge since the 1995 Quebec referendum. Alberta has real grievances that need addressing, but separation would be incredibly complicated and costly for everyone. Former Prime Minister Brian Campbell called for calm. "I've seen these tensions before. What we need is honest conversation and compromise from all sides." Indigenous leaders across Canada also spoke up, reminding everyone that many First Nations territories cross provincial boundaries. "Our treaties are with the Crown, not individual provinces," said Grand Chief Robert Bear. "Any talk of separation must include our voices and respect our rights." Public opinion polls showed Canadians were divided. While most people outside Alberta opposed separation, many sympathized with Alberta's complaints about being ignored by the federal government. As protests both for and against separation grew in cities across the country, the Governor General made a rare public statement calling for unity and respectful dialogue. Throughout our history, Canadians have faced challenges by coming together, not pulling apart. With the country holding its breath, all eyes turned to the upcoming First Ministers' Conference, where the Prime Minister and all provincial leaders would meet face-to-face for the first time since Alberta dropped its bombshell announcement. Could this be the moment when Canada finally confronts its deepest divisions, or the beginning of its unraveling? Consequences for Canada's national stability. The growing tension between Alberta and the rest of Canada has created ripples that threaten to turn into waves across the entire country. What started as Alberta's frustration could now change Canada forever. If Alberta actually left Canada, the effects would be felt from coast to coast. Canada's identity as a united country would be deeply damaged. For over 150 years, Canadians have prided themselves on building a country that works together despite differences. An Alberta exit would shatter that image both at home and around the world. Other provinces are now watching closely. Saskatchewan, which shares many of Alberta's concerns about oil and gas policies, might follow Alberta's lead. Premier Scott Wilson of Saskatchewan has already said, "We're paying attention to what's happening next door. Many of our citizens feel the same frustration with Ottawa. This has created a dangerous domino effect possibility." Political scientist Maria Chen explains it simply. When one province seriously considers leaving, it makes the idea seem more normal for others. It's like when one person stands up at a concert, suddenly everyone feels they can do it too. The economic impacts would be huge. Alberta's oil industry provides jobs for people across Canada and contributes billions to the national economy. If Alberta left, Canada would lose about 17% of its total economic output overnight. Thousands of families would face uncertainty as businesses that work across provincial lines scrambled to adjust. Canada's dollar would likely drop in value, making everyday items more expensive for all Canadians. Retirement savings and investments would take a hit as markets reacted to the instability. Beyond money, there are practical problems that would affect daily life. What would happen to people who live in one province but work in another? Would they need passports to commute? Would Alberta create its own currency? Would families be split across a new international border? Indigenous communities would face special challenges. Many First Nations territories cross the Alberta border. Chief Sarah Blackfoot of the Treaty 7 Nations pointed out, "Our people were here before provinces existed. Our rights and lands can't be divided by new borders." The crisis has also revealed deeper problems in how Canada works. Many people in Western provinces feel that the system gives too much power to Ontario and Quebec simply because they have more people. As one Alberta farmer put it, "It feels like we only matter when they want our money, not when we need help." Some experts see opportunity in this crisis. Constitutional lawyer David Thompson suggests this could force Canada to finally address regional inequalities that have been ignored for decades. Sometimes you need a crisis to fix long-standing problems. Young Canadians are especially worried. High school student Emma Chen from Vancouver said, "We're learning about Canadian history in school while watching it fall apart on the news. It's scary to think the country might be completely different by the time we graduate." Social media has made tensions worse, with angry posts and false information spreading quickly. This has turned neighbors against each other in some communities. In border towns like Lloydminster, which sits directly on the Alberta-Saskatchewan border, residents worry their city might literally be torn in two. As Canada faces this challenge, the question remains whether this crisis will lead to a permanent split or become the painful but necessary push for Canada to reinvent itself as a more balanced federation where all regions feel valued and heard.